Hello and welcome back to Pest Control Unlocked. I'm Konstantin Schwartz. On the 11th of August, a line of storms crossed the Midwest. It knocked out power to more than 1 million customers across 4 states. One utility called it the biggest outage in its history. 3 days later, tens of thousands of commercial sites were still dark. In this episode, we'll cover the demand shock in the Midwest, a consumer economy that's clearly weakening, a small business economy that clearly isn't, diesel at $5.40, and an El Niño that NOAA says has historic proportions. And the biggest operator in the world announcing a new shape for itself. Same 3 segments as always. Macro, what the world outside did to us. Levers, what the industry did to itself. And then the guardrails, what the rule book did.
First up, the macro events. Let's start with the storm. The Derecho ran from Illinois into northwestern Indiana. NIPSCO had 302,000 customers out, which is 60% of its base and the biggest outage it has ever recorded. Now, think about what that does inside a fruit plant or a cold storage. 3 things happen and they stack. 1. Refrigeration fails. Product spoils, waste piles up. That's an attractant load for flies and rodents. 2. Cleanup starts. Doors get propped open. Your structural exclusion is gone for days. 3. Wind damage, roofs, soffits, downed trees, new entry points nobody has surveyed. So that's a 4 to 8 week pressure curve. Chicago, Northwest Indiana, Greater Cincinnati, and it starts now. Then came the flooding on the 13th and 14th of August. A month of rain in hours. That pushes rodents into buildings on a 2 to 4 week lag and gives you mosquito habitat on a 7 to 10 day cycle. Out west, Reno and Salt Lake City both hit 103 Fahrenheit. But the daytime high isn't the number that matters. The overnight low is, and it sat between 80 and 95 degrees in the Mojave. Overnight cooling normally slows cockroach and ant development. Take it away and generation times compress. Expect callbacks in the southwest for food service areas through late August. Now the economics. The consumer and the small businesses are heading in opposite directions. The consumer first. Retail sales fell 0.6% in July, the first drop in 9 months. Sentiment came in at 51%, down 7.6. Payrolls fell by 23,000. Now the small business. The NFIB index rose to 99.8, an 11-month high. Hiring plans jumped 9 points to 20%. Weak consumer and firmer small business. For a root business, that's a good mix on commercial and a bad one on residential. And it confirms something. Both of the largest operators flagged residential softness in late July. Rollins on the 22nd, cutting guidance. Rentokil on the 30th. I covered both prints on episode 2 and episode 5. They called it before any macro number backed them up. Sentiment at 51 is that number. Rollins also gave us a useful cut. Their slowdown sat in the brands that wait for the phone to ring. The ones selling door-to-door grew above target. So the split isn't residential versus commercial. It's demand you wait for versus demand you go get. Now the part I think that gets underweighted. July CPI came in at 3.4%. PPI came in at 4.7%. That gap is the squeeze in one number. Your inputs are rising at 4.7%. Your customers are benchmarking 3.4%. Energy fell 1.5% on the month, which looks like a relief. It isn't. Energy is still up 14.7% on the year, and the pump is worse than the index. In the second week of August, gasoline averaged $4 a gallon. Diesel was 5.40. A year ago, 320 versus 370. Both are record seasonal highs. Gasoline is up 25%. That's your fleet. Diesel is up over 45%. That's the freight cost on everything delivered to your branch. So why isn't it easing? Because the cause hasn't moved. The Strait of Hormuz has been closed since late February. That's a fifth of global oil flows. On the 4th, 5th, and 6th of August, tracking counted between 8 and 15 vessels a day crossing the Strait of Hormuz. Before the conflict, it was around 130. 6 months in, shipping is still down about 90%. Brent oil is 16% above pre-war levels, and the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve is under 300 million barrels, the lowest since 1983. So the buffer is largely spent. But here's the real tell. The Department of Energy does expect fuel to ease, except its forecast now has diesel just under $5 at the year end, and that was revised upward from a month ago. The official forecast for relief got revised toward more expensive. That's not a spike, that's a new operating level. Now here's why that matters more than a normal cost line. Core CPI is 2.5%, and core strips out energy, so the fastest rising cost is the one excluded from the index your customer benchmarks you against. You walk in with a fuel story, they answer with 2.5%. And it's one chain, not two stories. The war sets the fuel price. Fuel and uncertainty hit the consumer. The consumer stops picking up the phone. It lands on your P&L twice, once as a cost, once as a demand problem. There are further three quick demand signals. West Nile stood at 143 cases through August the 4th, up 30 in a week, about 2.5 times the pace of 2003, the biggest recorded U.S. outbreak, and August is the peak. Second is dengue. Florida reported 8 local cases in Hillsborough and 2 in Pinellas, where a mosquito control manager said this: Pinellas doesn't have a modern history of having dengue in the county. Dengue is the better commercial trigger because Aedes aegypti is a container breeder with a short flight range. Control is a property level problem. So hotels, patio restaurants, and multifamily units in those counties have a reason to buy. Third, ticks. 4 pathogens in one regional news cycle, which supports an integrated tick program rather than single pathogen spraying. Now on the other side, restaurant and retail distress accelerated. 588 closures and distress events in 1 week, up 36%. One such closure is worth slowing down on. Salad & Go filed Chapter 11 on the 4th of August and closed all 70 remaining locations the next day, a chain valued at $1.1 billion in 2022. It was not rescued, whatever the headlines suggest. The founders of Dutch Brothers bought leases and equipment out of the bankruptcy. The brand is gone. So if you hold an incumbent relationship at any of those sites, that's a rebid. But here's the part I sit with. Reporting on the filing points to weak demand and rising costs. It also notes the Cyclospora outbreak weakened demand further, even though Salad & Go was never linked to the contaminated lettuce. A salad chain not implicated in the outbreak hit by it anyway. I'm not saying that's why it failed, but it's a food safety event and the contagion is to the category. You don't have to be named to lose the customer. I mentioned the El Niño effect in my first episode. It moved this week, and it's the most underreported item on the 7 days. On the 13th of August, NOAA's Climate Prediction Center published its monthly ENSO discussion. Status stays at advisory, but the language firmed. There's now a greater than 90% chance of a very strong event and a 69% chance that October to December is classed as historic. That would rank it among the strongest since 1950. In the near term, AccuWeather cut its Atlantic forecast for hurricanes the same day, so the post-storm remediation spike you budget for is less likely to arrive. But pre-position anyway. Atlantic water is very warm, so what that does form can form very close to shore. The winter matters more. A strong El Niño pushes the jet stream south. Wetter southern tier, warmer north. In pest terms, that's an odd first quarter. Less northern die-off and earlier emergence, and southern pressure running straight through the off-season. If it verifies, quiet January and rampant in March is the wrong shape for 2027. Have that conversation with your operations team now. Now here's my 2-part take. 1. Rollins saw leads improve in early July and said so. I don't think that survives the quarter because sentiment at $51 and $4 gasoline both landed afterwards. So consumer-initiated residential deteriorates again and the channel gap at Rollins widens. 2. On fuel, and this is the one that has already started. Rollins Q2 gross margin fell 100 basis points, partly on fuel, at $4.60 for the diesel. My call is that it gets worse. Fuel or fleet shows up again in the Q3 bridge at both Rollins and Rentokil, and at least one of them puts a number on it. We now take a look at some of the levers. On the 13th of August, Rentokil split into two divisions, North America and International. 3 appointments came with it. Phil Wood becomes CEO of International. He has led the UK, Ireland since 2009 and has run marketing and innovation for 18 months. He keeps the regional role. Rafael Carrasco joined as CEO North America on the 3rd of August from Waste Management, and Matt Joachim joins as Group Chief Transformation Officer on the 7th of September from 20 years at McKinsey. Mike Duffy's line was, "Our focus is now firmly on execution." I've watched this type of sequence run in a lot of industries. It has a shape. New CEO, retired margin target, external transformation hire, split into clean divisions. 4 things I'd draw out. First, the appointments tell you what the company thinks its problem is. Duffy came from logistics, Carrasco from waste. Neither is a pest person. That's a company saying its issue is route execution, not technical capability. That's defensible and also a bet. Commercial pest at national account level is compliance-led and trust-led, and audits don't behave like waste routes. Second, Phil Wood is wearing 3 hats. For a division of that size, that's unusual. I'd read it as a signal about where the money is going, and it isn't international. Third, watch marketing and innovation. That's where connected products partly live. Split a global platform across 2 P&Ls, and the economics get a lot harder. Fourth, and the one I'd bookmark, the H1 statement described 90 countries with 93% of profit from the top 20 markets. And the intention is to, and this is a quote, simplify the portfolio to focus resources on high growth markets. That's divestment language. The market is reading this as a story about accountability. I'd suggest it's at least as much a story about optionality. A clean divisional P&L is the structure you need before you can do anything else with either half. I won't run the H1 numbers here, they're in episode number 5. But the short version, North America Pest Control Services grew 2.6% organically, and management named commercial as the slower part. Rollins reported commercial as its resilient segment. So go back to segment 1 on residential, those two agree. So residential is a sector condition. Commercial is the only place they diverge, and the segment they contradict each other on isn't being driven by the market. This comparison was covered in episode 6 and episode 7. In the meantime, M&A activity still continues. Orkin acquired J&J Pest Control in New York, a small tuck-in, but note the detail. It closed on the 13th of April and was announced on the 12th of August. Headline M&A counts lag real consolidation. The wider cadence stayed high and private equity dominated. With the Fed expected to hold interest rates in September, I'd expect that to carry on into quarter 4. But I've separated one deal out because it's being miscounted as another roll-up. Tyro Group acquired Pest Control Plus in the Greater Toronto area this month. That's their entry into Canada. So who's Tyro? They're based in Norway, backed by a Nordic private equity. An acquisition in Houston last November was their first outside of Europe. California in June, the Texas Gulf Coast last month, now Ontario. 4 North American acquisitions in 9 months. 2 reasons to pay attention. First, the CEO, COO, CFO, and CIO all came out of Nomor, one of Europe's largest pest control companies. This is an operating team that already built a Nordic consolidator, doing it again across the Atlantic. Second, if you're a seller, your buyer pool has changed. There's now European strategic capital shopping in Texas, California, and Ontario. More bidders usually means a better number. And notice the direction. Rentokil is separating North America from international and using divestment language. A Norwegian group is building transatlantically. Consolidation story is no longer national. So my take on the levers. Rentokil becomes a seller as well as a buyer. By the full year results, I'd expect at least one country exit or disposal, announced or signal. And that's not a criticism. Concentrating on the top 20 countries that make 93% of your profit is rational. but it changes who owns what. If you operate in one of the other 70, plan around it. Grade it in March. And lastly, we'll cover the guardrails. The most important regulatory item this week has almost no product impact on us. On the 10th of August, California announced that every manufacturer of paraquat had voluntarily canceled their registrations. Full phase out. Paraquat isn't a structural pest control tool. So why does it matter? Because of how it happened. A straight reevaluation produced a complete market exit. No rulemaking, no federal action, no cancellation order. The registrants simply left. So any active ingredient in a California reevaluation queue is now at risk. Not by regulator order, by registrant choice. When the cost of defending a registration exceeds the value of selling there, the product goes. And it goes everywhere. And on a related note, and I'll keep it factual, on the 6th of August, Senate Agriculture Republicans voted down Senator Booker's amendment on FIFRA labeling. That's the third vehicle to stall this summer. Label language remains a complete defense, and that fight has moved to the states now. On the 11th of August, FDA finalized its fresh cut produce guidance, replacing guidance from 2008. Fresh cut has no kill step, so it's about protecting ready-to-eat product. Processors refresh their hazard analysis in the second half. What auditors rescore is environmental monitoring, exclusion, and sanitation zones. That's a dated upsell window, next 2 quarters, and it lands while Cyclospora grows, 9,481 illnesses across 17 states. Legislators are pressing to end the delay to the food traceability rule, currently July 2028. If that shortens, your clients face a compliance sprint, and exclusion documentation is one of the cheapest things to evidence. Now, here's where it joins segment 1. That outbreak weakened demand at a chain which was never linked to lettuce. So if you sell commercial programs, that's your argument, and it isn't about pests. Your customer's exposure isn't limited to being the source. It extends to being in the category. And the document program is what they can show at speed when the problem belongs to somebody else. And here are 4 fast ones to close. OSHA renewed its warehouse emphasis program and extended it to 5 years. Heat is a named hazard, and there's still no federal heat standard, so it's enforced through inspections and the general duty clause. You can't run one heat policy across states. California rejected a class-based PFAS phase-out, but an oversight version is live. Expect PFAS questions from audit-sensitive accounts within the next 2 to 3 quarters. And the EPA extended its guidance to MPOX. That's a pathway for disinfection lines, but it's registrant-triggered. Confirm before you put that into a proposal. And MyPest, nothing confirmed that Phase 2 landed on schedule. So treat 30th of September as live. So here's my take on the guardrails. The binding constraint on your toolkits is shifting from federal cancellation to state reevaluation and registrant economics. My call is that over the next 24 months, more actives leave the U.S. market by voluntary cancellation than an EPA order. Let's see in August of 2028 how that holds up. So let me pull all the 3 threads together now. Nobody scheduled the derecho. You can't put a 4 to 8 week pressure curve across 4 states on a calendar written in January. The operators who capture that revenue know which accounts lost power and which condition those buildings are in now, this week, not at the next visit. And 2 things squeeze from the other side. Core inflation at 2.5% is closing your pricing runway. And fuel, the cost you control least, is set 6,000 miles away in a strait you'll never see. So if you can't take price and you can't control what a gallon costs, the only lever left is miles. Fewer miles per outcome, fewer visits that find nothing. That's not a cost-cutting argument. It's a routing argument, and routing is a data argument. Meanwhile, the guardrails keep tightening around documentation, hazard analysis, traceability, monitoring, heat records. Every one is a data problem before it's a chemistry problem. And this is the season thesis, and this week strengthened it. The shock just arrived as a fuel bill instead of a storm. Which leaves the question, The largest operator in the world has just told us its problem is route execution, not technology, and it split the structure a global monitoring platform would sit inside. So does the technology transition get led by the majors at all, or by the people who buy from us when their auditors start asking for evidence? I don't think that's settled. The longer version of this answer is in episode 3 on IPM 3.0. The calls for me this week: residential deteriorates before commercial, and fuel gets named again, both graded in November. Rentokil appears on the sell side, graded in March. Voluntary cancellations overtake regulatory cancellation, graded in 2028. Come and tell me where I'm wrong. Thank you very much for listening.